Here's special guest host, Larry Fedoruk.
Good morning and welcome to Thursday. Welcome to the snow day. We actually got a snow day. We got Valentine's Day tomorrow and then Family Day on Monday. It's the 1, 2, 3 punch we've all been waiting for. Oh my goodness. I've got a few markers that I keep in my head for, and I know you're not supposed to wish time away. You're never supposed to wish time away, but I think all of us at some point, like maybe like a day like today, we kind of want winter to be over. And annually, I found myself having a few markers that, okay, we're getting through another winter in Canada. And one of them is when we turn the clocks back to daylight saving time, and that's usually early March. So that's coming up. So that's a marker for me that I go, all right, we made it. Another one is Valentine's Day, which is tomorrow. Another one is the auto show in Toronto, which is kind of a sign of spring for me. So that's coming up, and that's next week. I think that starts. So that's kind of cool. Another one is spring training for the Blue Jays, which is today. So whatever little thing you can use to say we're trudging along here. We're going to make it to spring somehow. Spring training for the Blue Jays today. Pitchers and catchers, it's like that first day where they have to report. And yeah, it's grown men playing a kid's game in Florida somewhere. I know it doesn't shovel your driveway for you, does it? But at the same time, it's just one of those little pieces of information that's out there today that are like, okay, spring training starts. That's a sign. Nevertheless, we've got this to deal with today. This I was thinking too, as the storm, was anticipated and predicted and all that stuff, and we're waiting for it late yesterday and overnight. And about 3 this morning, I heard this kind of dull, low rumble that woke me up. And I was like, what is that? Oh no. Is that distant thunder? Is this a thunder snow? And it was actually a snow plow doing a few early passes in the back parking lot of my building. And I was like, oh my God. I mean, I'm grateful that they're out there getting an early start on clearing some of the driveways around here. But at the same time, I'm like, it's 3 a.m. What are you doing? So I'm aware that, I'm sleeping, but I'm aware that the storm is here, right? Don't have to get up and look out a window. I can hear the snow plows outside already. But I was thinking about the snow, and we watch the news and we see the wildfires in parts of the world, and we see the floods, and we see the hurricanes and the typhoons and so on and so forth, and the winter storms, which is what we kind of get. For the most part, that's our deal. That's what we have to deal with once, twice a year, sometimes more. And of those choices, I say to myself, well, the winter storm, not bad, as opposed to the other conditions that people have to face other parts of the world. The winter storm, we're hardy, we're Canadians, always will be. Well, we will not be a state. More on that later. But anyway, we're Canadians, we're hardy, we can deal with the snow. There's my, at least an attempt at a positive spin on that today. So we do have that going. By the way, the Extreme Weather Center remains open if you want to go to that page on our website. It is kitchener.citynews.ca. You can do that. And as mentioned throughout the morning, you can also call star 401 to report any traffic traffic information that we may not have, that you may see out there or that just happened. You share it with your fellow citizens and with us at star 401, and that page is continuing to be open. Although, as you know, the storm warning, the snow warning is basically subsided. It's called off for now, but I'm just looking at, tomorrow, Valentine's Day, should be kind of a clear day, nice sunny day, but cold and all that kind of stuff. That's a perfect day to cuddle up with your special someone indoors. And then on the weekend, maybe another hit, and maybe another hit after that. So, We're actually fortunate enough today to have on the show a little bit later. We're going to have Dave Phillips on. He's senior climatologist at Environment Canada, one of my favorite people to talk to. By the way, we love Dave. Talked to him so many times over the years. And he's going to be on a little bit later on in the show, and we're just going to kind of review what we got and what we're going to get. Okay, so that is part of the show today. The other piece of information that kind of hit me this morning, I'm assuming because you're listening today that you love news and you keep track of news and you want to know what's going on in your world and around, as I do, and you turn on the news in the morning and you absorb a lot of information per day. And for me, I do that. And for me, whether I compute it all at once or anything, but I absorb it and it's all in there. And every once in a while, a tiny bit of information pops through that seems to overtake all the other stuff, right? And today, for me, that piece of information is that Sidney Crosby is 37 years old. Sid the Kid. And I'm aware of the passage of time and how that works. I understand that, but at the same time, I know I'm not getting older. How is everybody else getting older? You know, it's Sid the Kid is 37. I know that happened. It was just kind of a shocker to hear that number this morning when they were reporting about the Four Nations face-off, and they're playing last night. And I thought it was kind of cool. Mitch Marner scored the winning goal in overtime against Sweden in Montreal. And I'm not following this tournament that much and not the biggest hockey guy in the world, but at the same time, Mitch Marner, you know, that story about Mitch Marner thinking that he was a 10-year-old Mitch Marner admiring Sidney Crosby, the next great one, you know, entering professional hockey and making an impact. And he's 10 years old watching Sidney Crosby, and suddenly he's on the ice with him, gets a pass from Sidney Crosby, scores the winning goal in overtime, that assist by Sid the Kid. You're like, wow, that's a cool story. That's every Canadian kid who plays hockey. It's every kid's dream. It's one day that'll be me. And for some, like a Mitch Marner, it turns out that was him. So that was a cool part of the story. But the other part was the reminder that Sidney Crosby had 3 assists last night, that he's just still a going force. And then they mentioned that he's 37 years old. And that just stuck with me this morning. I don't know why. I still remember when he was signed to Pittsburgh and the story was out there about him in his father's basement. He'd open up was it the dryer or the washing machine? Yeah, I think it was a dryer. He opened up the door and he would shoot pucks down in the basement into the door to practice his accuracy. And of course, the dryer got all marked up by pucks and dented and black marks all over it. And that story kind of stayed with him. And then when he was on The Tonight Show with Jay Leno, they brought out a dryer. Do you remember this? It's probably still on YouTube somewhere. They brought out a dryer and he shot pucks into it on The Tonight Show. And he's 37. Time marches on. We do have a show today. I mentioned Dave Phillips is on. There's a few other great guests and topics that I'll outline in a moment. We'll be right back here on 570 News Radio. Larry Fedoruk in for Mike Farwell. Mike traveling with the team. I'm here today and tomorrow. Thank you once again for having me on 570 News Radio. A lot to talk about today. Coming up in just a few minutes' time, just after 9:30, Scott Hamilton is going to join us. He's Ward 7 councillor at Cambridge. And of course, the region of Waterloo and Cambridge councils have joined many councils, many municipal governments, councillors, mayors across this country vowing to battle trade tariffs. My theory on the trade war, if we're going to call it that, if it's a trade war already, is that I don't know that we could win a trade war. I think that what we're looking for is more of a ceasefire. And peace talks during a ceasefire, if we're going to use the war analogy. But we shall see. Of course, you've heard all morning on 570 News Radio the news story from the Canadian Chamber of Commerce outlining a lot of communities that are going to be hit the hardest by trade tariffs if they go through, outside of aluminum and steel, of course. And Waterloo region right up there, top five, taking a hit. And it's around $19 billion worth of trade that would be affected out of the region alone. Isn't that incredible? That's a big number. And most of that is manufacturing, out of manufacturing. So do we take that hit? How do we battle? And those two councils vowing to battle the U.S. trade tariffs, or at least maybe even fortify ourselves against them somehow. I don't know. Nevertheless, Scott Hamilton coming up just after 9:30, and we're going to have that discussion about trade tariffs. I just did I have a podcast. It's called Later That Same Life, and it's on different topics every week. It's a weekly. And this week I did one on kind of about tariffs, a little bit about patriotism and buy Canadian and all that kind of stuff. But I've done a lot of research into tariffs, and it's interesting to me because tariffs have been around since trade, and trade has been around forever. Ever since, the first guy said, I can sell my potatoes in the next town over. All I got to do is get them there. Trade began, especially when they started to figure out how to get ships down the river and across the seas. That was world trade started, The New World would have never been discovered if explorers weren't looking for new trade routes, right? So trade has been around forever. Tariffs have been around forever. But in the last 30, 40, even 50 years, free trade has become the concept. The idea that, okay, tariffs are a revenue for a country, but if we have free trade, then there will be more trade, and we will see other income based on more cash flowing back and forth, more companies, more income taxes, things like that. So free trade, I think, has worked pretty well for half a century at least. And why someone would want to throw tariffs between friendly nations in there is beyond me. But, the why, Donald Trump, why? Anyway, the local discussion of that coming up a little bit after 9:30 with Scott Hamilton from Waterloo region, it was actually Cambridge councillor, but we're going to talk to him about that, what the local councillors are doing. I mentioned Dave Phillips is going to join us, climatologist from Senior Environment Canada, rather. He's up after 10 o'clock. We're going to talk about the storm that we had and what's coming up next. A little later on, speaking of the tariffs and Trump and all that, if Canada, or an attempt was made to annex Canada as a 51st state, people say, what would that do to us? It's impossible. We're not going to do it. But what would that do to us? But there's a theory out there that it would actually destroy the United States. And the scenario is an actual military attempt at a takeover. Like we haven't thought about that, or have we? I don't know. Through strong arm tactics and economics, Canada gets, or an attempt is made to take over Canada. What about the military just coming across the border, and what would happen? We're going to speak to a professor at the University of Toronto who says that could destroy the United States. Never mind. Also later on this morning after 11 o'clock, we're going to be talking about renoviction bylaws in the city of Kitchener. They're doing some research into putting renoviction bylaws into effect, but not soon enough for some. Jackie Wells is going to join us. She's with Waterloo Region ACORN. ACORN is a national advocate for tenants, and they have a Waterloo Region branch. Jackie Wells joining us later to talk about renoviction bylaws. All that and more on the Mike Farwell Show this morning. I'm Larry Fedoruk filling in. This is 570 News Radio. Larry Fedoruk in for Mike Farwell today on this snow day. Extreme Weather Center page is open. Extreme Weather Center open. The page is on our website, I should say, kitchener.citynews.ca. If you're wondering whether something is open or closed today, generally assume that it's closed. It's closed. This happens on snow days. But if you need specific information, go to kitchener.citynews.ca and go to the Extreme Weather Center page, and you can get the information there. We're talking about tariffs. I did do some research on this. Don't want to bore you with stats, but here's some of the obvious ones. Here's an odd one. In the United States, manufacturing in 2023 was at an all-time high, but they are still only about 10. Manufacturing accounts for about 10% of the American GDP. So I don't know what this made in America is. America has not been a manufacturing company for decades, pretty much probably since World War II, really, certainly the 50s. They have a strong dollar. Americans would rather buy something than make it at home. And their dollar can buy more than they could ever afford to make with that same dollar on their own soil. They can buy more labor with their dollar in Korea than they can in Kansas, So this Made in America thing is really kind of a political tactic, I guess, because, 27% of the American GDP is importing, exporting. So why would you want to mess with that 27% for the sake of the 10%? I'm not sure I understand that. Now, if you look at Canadian numbers, about a third of our GDP is importers. Importers make up for about a third of our gross domestic product. That's pretty incredible. Now, granted, that's not all from the U.S., but mostly. So those, I guess, are some of the issues that are facing us when we look at tariffs specifically, because it's a tax. Really, what a tariff is, it's a tax. It's a tax on the importer. The importer pays the tariff. And here we go. It doesn't look like Donald Trump, backing away anytime soon. And the battle has been not only federal, but provincial and municipal. And the regions of Waterloo and Cambridge councils are, I guess officially, if you want to say it that way, joining the fight against U.S. tariffs. And we heard that Canadian Chamber of Commerce report this morning talking about how the Waterloo region and Kitchener, Cambridge, right up there in the top cities in Canada that are going to be affected most if U.S. tariffs go ahead. So we're going to be joined by Scott Hamilton. He is Ward 7 councillor, Cambridge. He is joining us in just a couple of seconds here, and we're going to talk about the councils joining the fight against U.S. tariffs, how they calculate the dependency, and what efforts are underway to be in the battle. That's coming up next here on 570 News Radio.
Here's special guest host, Larry Fedoruk.
And nothing like a good weather conversation. Love talking about the weather. It's the great conversation starter in the elevator, on transit, at the cashier. Some weather we're having, huh? But if you really want to have the best weather conversation, you need the best weather person. That's David Phillips, climatologist at Environment Canada. With all due respect to all the climatologists and weather people out there, David Phillips is the senior climatologist. He's coming up after 10 o'clock. We'll talk about what we got and what we're getting. That's coming up in about half an hour. Right now on the program, as I mentioned, the region of Waterloo and Cambridge councils have joined the fight against U.S. tariffs. Joining us now, the Ward 7 councillor in Cambridge, Scott Hamilton. Councillor, thank you for joining us this morning.
Thanks so much for having me this morning, Larry. Appreciate it.
I'm looking at the national fight, the one Canada, the Team Canada approach, which includes, of course, provincial and, more importantly, as we've heard this morning from the Chamber of Commerce, the municipal efforts. Tell me about those efforts, how you assess the damage and what you want to do to sort of battle the tariffs, if you will.
Yeah, well, I think we hear a lot about the different levels of government we have, especially in the Waterloo region, right? We have a two-tier system where we have a municipal government, we have a regional government, and on top of that, of course, we have provincial and federal. And at times, we all differ significantly about contentious issues. It might be healthcare, it might be infrastructure, it might be funding. But when it comes to something like this, where we're facing an external threat, some have been labeling it economic warfare, this is a moment where all of those levels of government have really come together to agree that we need to be unified. We need a coherent, linked approach that tackles these tariffs and the threats that we're facing in a way that can sustain the viability of everything from cities to regions to the province to a country. And so we've seen a wave sweeping Canada of municipalities, provinces agreeing how should we best respond to this threat of tariffs? How can we ensure that we can safeguard the livelihoods of the workers and the persons and the communities that are affected? And so Tuesday night, Cambridge Council voted unanimously on a motion put forward by Mayor Liggett to basically do whatever we can as a city to try and protect our residents and link up with the region when it comes to guarding against these tariff threats. And you mentioned the impact. I know we've been discussing it all morning on 570. 40% of goods made in Waterloo region go to the USA. We have 1,000 companies in Waterloo region, 20% of our GDP, 17% of our workforce. And in Cambridge, there's no different. It's no different. The manufacturing sector of Cambridge actually employs 12.5% of our working population. So we have about 16,319 workers that are directly linked to manufacturing. It's the largest industry in Cambridge, and it would be most exposed. And Cambridge is also home to 350 businesses operating in the manufacturing sector currently. And as you know, Larry, it's the automotive manufacturing sector that's specifically vulnerable to tariffs because of how integrated the supply chain is. And the last number I'll cite here is that every single job in the motor vehicle manufacturing industry is actually estimated to lead to 4.5 more additional jobs down that supply chain, down the employment line, down the economy. And that's according to the Trillium Network for Advanced Manufacturing. So as a municipality, it just behooves us to join with our partners at the region, at the province, and at the federal level to push back against these tariffs however we can to protect our community, protect our jobs, and protect our country generally.
You mentioned, the trade war. I use the analogy of instead of in a trade war, it feels now that we're in a ceasefire and in the middle of peace talks. Your assessment of that, because really we're on the verge of war here, but right now we're negotiating. Would that be a fair assessment?
I don't think anyone has any idea what's happening right now. And that's,
true.
It's mainly because it's so unpredictable and it's so uncertain. And I'd say, I used to be a political science professor at Laurier and the Balsillie School. And even in war, you could say there are typical rules that are followed. There are procedures, there are precedents. And here we're really in uncharted territory because of the absolute uncertainty that we're experiencing with a nation that we thought were our best friends. And so one analogy that I've heard, Larry, is it's actually COVID. Like, remember when COVID-19 hit? It was only a few years ago. We had a very similar sense of a loss of control, of unpredictability, of uncertainty, of anxiety. And so I just want to remind everyone out there that, to paraphrase Yogi Berra, it ain't over till it's over, right? Nothing has happened until it's happened. So I think we have to prepare for the worst but hope for the best, and recognize that even when we have these circumstances that are out of our control, we can control how we act to it. We can control our reactions. And I think as Canadians, now is the time to put aside a lot of our differences and to act together, to prepare for the worst but hope for the best. And just like COVID, Larry, no matter what happens, we're going to come out of it together. We're going to come out of it unified. But I think we have to recognize that we might face a very difficult path ahead, and that municipalities, provinces, we have to take those steps today, whether it's working on procurement strategies to ensure that we can still get the essential materials needed to continue our manufacturing, secure our manufacturing base, whether it's buying local, whether it's just, and this is important, I think, Larry, when we're this stressed and this anxious, we have to remember to just be kind to one another. We don't know what our neighbors are going through, if they're anxious about losing their jobs, if they're concerned about whether or not they're going to be able to put food on their table. So just being kind to one another at this point is so essential, because the potential reverberations of these tariffs, it won't just affect the industries that are directly impacted by these tariffs. It will reverberate through the entire city, through the entire region. It will touch every life. So it's essential that we remember we are all in this together. We have to be kind and compassionate to all of our residents and our citizens with whatever happens in the future.
The only thing I would add to that is people should take an oath to never give up. That's the other thing I think people are saying. But to me, buying local and buy Canadian is not enough. And I think you intimated that in that it's got to be a multi-pronged approach. Everything you're saying about reassessing, looking at who our customer base is and maybe expanding that, plus the, buy local, be kind, and carry on. It's a multi-pronged approach.
Yeah, absolutely. And what we're seeing right now is that over the past, let's say, few decades, especially since NAFTA came in the early 90s and the late 80s, the complexity of our supply chains, where we get our materials to create goods and where our goods go, it's like a circulatory system. And so to unpack that is going to take a very long time. The essence of liberal free trade is that if you eliminate a border, then let's say two states don't have to have the same manufacturing processes. They don't have to have the same procurement, the same development. It means that one state can use its comparative advantage for one good it has to trade with another state that has an advantage in producing another good. And then you both win. You can both get the highest amount of goods at the lowest cost. And political scientists would also say, well, that also prevents war, right? It's an old theory called democratic peace theory, where democracies and liberal economies won't go to war with one another because that would be crazy. You're going to hurt one another. Your supply chains are so integrated. Why would you hurt each other? And now we're seeing all of that logic turned on its head. And that's where the uncertainty and the anxiety and the lack of control comes in. So you're right. It's got to be more than just buy Canadian, because even American companies, right? Toyota is a Japanese company, and yet it employs 10,000 people in the city of Cambridge. So it's not just who owns the company, where is that headquarters located in the world. We have to look very closely at what are the organizations, the businesses that sustain our streets and our city here, right? Whether it's Frito-Lay, whether it's Toyota. So it's not necessarily who owns it. It's who is working in our city. Where do their materials come from? How can we support them? And we have to take a good look at ourselves as a nation, because we have free trade with about 51 countries across the world, but we don't even have free trade within Canada. And so that's something that I really hope the provincial and the federal government step up and alter, is that we need to reduce the interprovincial trade barriers if we ever want to pull ourselves out of this and maximize the economic potential of our cities and our country. It should not be easier to buy wine from Italy than it is from British Columbia. So if we want to pull ourselves out of this, we need to trust our federal counterparts to do their due diligence and finally, after all these decades, get rid of those barriers that we are now seeing are truly holding us back.
Yeah, and I think a lot of things have made us look in the mirror. I'm not thankful to Trump for that, but perhaps that some good comes out of this. But Scott, we're out of time, but thank you for the insights and the thoughts. Great conversation. Thank you.
Thanks for having me, Larry. You have a great day.
You as well. Scott Hamilton is Ward 7 councillor in Cambridge, talking about just the general fight, but also that the regional councils of Waterloo and Cambridge have kind of joined the fight to say at every level of government we have to figure out a way to battle the threatened U.S. tariffs. More in the moment, of course. We're always in the moment, but more in a moment here on 570 News Radio.
Every single job in the motor vehicle manufacturing industry is actually estimated to lead to 4.5 more additional jobs down that supply chain. And that's according to the Trillium Network for Advanced Manufacturing. So as a municipality, it just behooves us to join with our partners at the region, at the province, and at the federal level to push back against these tariffs however we can to protect our community, protect our jobs, and protect our country generally.
I'm Larry Fedorkin from Mike Farwell moments ago. That was our discussion with Scott Hamilton, Ward 7 councillor, Cambridge, about the region of Cambridge and Waterloo councils joining the fight against U.S. tariffs, because it's something everybody has to do at every level of government. And then, of course, you and I, the Buy Canadian, and Scott touched on this. It's very complicated world economic system. Theoretically, every country could be self-sufficient, I guess, but it's just not the way it works. The world runs on world trade, basically. I grow this and you make that and we'll trade. I make this, you grow that. See, not every country can grow oranges, but every country wants orange juice. There's no country in the world that makes everything that country's consumer demands, okay? We as consumers, we demand fresh fruit in the middle of winter. So if we can't get it from British Columbia or Ontario, then we'll import it from the States or South America or somewhere, right? So world trade, and we have Donald Trump throwing a wrench into all of that on some made in America political agenda. Isolationism has never really worked. And it's interesting that, we talk about governments battling. We just had all the premiers and several mayors, including Mayor Burbank and a bunch of others, in Washington, D.C. to hold talks with American officials. And yet, what do we do? Well, we buy Canadian. I appreciate that effort. Believe me, I do. But I don't know if it makes up the customer base that people would need, And then you buy Canadian. How do you buy Canadian in the 21st century world economic market? Do you boycott McDonald's, therefore? Well, 90,000 Canadians work at McDonald's, maybe even higher now. 100,000 Canadians work at Walmart. If the boycotts work, do we want Canadians to lose jobs? We look at companies. There's 7,000 companies listed on Wall Street and the Toronto Stock Exchange. Of the two together, there's about 7,000 companies. Are we supposed to know who owns what percentage of that company is owned by Americans or Canadians? And if it's an American company, maybe it's in your retirement fund portfolio. Maybe the teachers' pension fund has money in American companies, so we boycott them, and then the teachers' pension fund in Ontario goes down. You know what I'm saying? It's so intertwined. It's so intertwined. You can't just buy Canadian and say, all right, I appreciate it, but we also can't compute all of the evidence before we pick up a box of macaroni. Plus, a lot of people, when they vote with their dollar, they vote for themselves. I do. At the end of the day, I do. I got to get the best price on a grocery item that I can get. I wish I could say I'd pay a premium. Not that you always have to pay a premium to buy Canadian, but sometimes you do. And can you do it? Can you do it? Most people cannot. Most people have to look at price points and not the made in Canada sticker. And by the way, product of Canada means 98% of it was made in Canada, produced in Canada. If it says made in Canada, 51% of it has to be made here. You can still say made in Canada. There you go. We'll talk more about this in a moment. Get your thoughts as well. Larry Fedoruk in for Mike Farwell, 570 News Radio. Larry Fedoruk in for Mike Farwell. Mike is traveling with the Rangers. You got me filling in for Mike today, and barring any unforeseen circumstances, tomorrow. Just joining us, we're talking about U.S. tariffs. And part two of that is this 51st state babble that initially sounded like Donald Trump just baiting us, right? Just baiting us with this 51st state idea. And immediately everybody, almost in unison, saying that will never happen. Okay. And I feel that way. That would never happen. But as we know with Donald Trump, never say never. The other thing about the 51st state comment was, it's come clear that it's not just baiting. It's not just some, poke, poke, nudge, nudge, wink, wink, dinner talk. He's serious. That's even according to our prime minister, who said, I think he's serious about that, guys. So what if it was a military invasion? Have you thought about that? I guess I sort of have. I was kind of afraid to think of that. There is a professor who's studied kind of the idea of what if it were the U.S. military just suddenly marching across the border and saying, okay, you belong to us now. And we're going to talk about that strategy with the U of T professor coming up next hour, just after 10:30 this morning. We'll talk about that concept, because the idea of a 51st state, from a military sense of the U.S. military being mobilized to take over Canada, geez, can you imagine? Anyway, the thought was that it would actually destroy the United States. what it would do to us. I guess you liken it to Russia marching into Ukraine, but, because Russia has said, you really belong to us, you always have. So why don't we just make that official? We'll march in and take it over. Is that the U.S.? It's not identical. The Canada was never really part of the U.S. and then broke away. It's different, but still, I think there's a parallel there. Anyway, that discussion coming up after 10:30 this morning. Also on today's show, the other comment I saw online somewhere about the snow coming in from down south over these last 12, 15 hours and more of it. It's like, yeah, we're getting a lot of snow, but at least it's tariff-free, which, haha, I guess we have to find our humor and laugh where we can at the challenges that Donald Trump has set before us. But yeah, the snow that we see out there coming from the south is tariff-free, and it's blasted us across Ontario. Talking to friends in Toronto, Ottawa, east of there, Montreal got hit, and by this afternoon, Atlantic Canada will be digging into their storm chips big time because they're getting it this afternoon. So here it goes, and even more to come apparently. So coming up in a few minutes, right after the news, we have David Phillips, climatologist at Environment Canada. We'll talk about the weather coming up on 570 News Radio.
Here's special guest host, Larry Fedoruk.
And coming up on our show this morning, a little bit later, about an hour's time, we're going to talk about renoviction bylaws for the city of Kitchener. Is it about time? Well, they're taking their time, according to some, to put in renoviction bylaws. We'll get to that a little bit after 11 o'clock with a guest. Also, coming up after 10:30 this morning, would a military takeover of Canada by the U.S. destroy the U.S.? We'll have that discussion with a U of T professor. That's coming up a little bit after 10:30. Right now in the program, it's time to dig into the snow, at least figuratively, because we have this marriage between Mother Nature and Old Man Winter. And I don't like to poke my nose into people's relationships, but I think Mother Nature could do better. But here we are. And joining us to talk about the weather, senior climatologist at Environment Canada, David Phillips. Good morning, David.
Hey, good morning, Larry. Nice to speak to you today. And boy, after it's kind of interesting. This storm arrived and departed just as scripted, and brought the amount of snow we kind of affected. We saw, and hey, it's going to be flurries today, but there are some issues coming up later today that I think the strong winds and the very tough wind chill that we have to deal with. So the after effects of the snow. It may be gone, and you can see the visibility is cleared, but boy, it is still going to be a bit rough.
Yeah, isn't that interesting? Because the winds are going to be a factor, not just for strong winds, but wind chill comes, of course, with that. We know.
Well, that's right. I mean, what we're going to see today are winds that are sustained winds. These are winds that blowing constantly without ebb and flow for about 40 kilometers per hour with gusts up to 60. But Larry, we've got about half a meter of snow sitting on the ground. Not only the say 40 was or 35, 40 that was there before this storm came, and this storm brought about 20 centimeters of snow, 17, 19, 20 centimeters of snow. It stopped snowing, I think, in earnest about 9:15 this morning, but we still have a chance of flurries in the air. But those winds are going to pick up, and it's going to redistribute that snow. So, hey, it doesn't matter how much snow you got. It's the old snow and the new snow that's going to find a different location, and that's going to make it a little rough. So visibilities will be down at times, and I would dare say out in the rural areas there might even be some whiteouts. And as the temperatures drop, we're seeing lows tonight, maybe around -10, -11. But with those winds, we'll see wind chills of about -14, -16. That's pretty cold. And then just ahead, we see another system coming, but then really cold on on Family Day, one of the coldest days of the entire winter, highs of about -10, and there would be some flurries, but we also see some snow on the weekend. So this is really a nasty bout of winter weather. We've had a lot of kind of melting days in December and January, but really it's been for the last 10 days there hasn't been a melting temperature at all in the Kitchener-Waterloo area, and Larry, I look at the forecast, and I just don't see another melting day for the rest of February. So February already right now is about more than 2.5 degrees colder than it would normally be, and it's just like it's a sea change difference from last year when it was just rather balmy conditions. I think February came out last year as an average of about -1.5 degrees. Right now it's -7.8 in Kitchener. So quite a difference from last year, and certainly no melting going on. So this is about it's about one of the toughest moments of kind of winter. And the snow we got last night and early this morning is more than we've seen all this winter and all of last winter. So it's something that we're just kind of not accustomed to in recent months.
Yeah, we're hardy Canadians, but that only gets us so far. What about the vastness of this storm? When I see the weather maps, it just looks big geographically. Yeah. Is that right?
It is. That's a very good point. Larry, we have seen, where I live, up in lake effect country, we've had a lot of snow. I mean, Aurelia's had, maybe not double the amount of snow they normally get, but that's all homegrown. That's all locally produced. What we've been missing this year are some weather systems from the United States and elsewhere, and they just haven't distributed the amounts of snow. Yeah, we've had overall, I guess now we can say that we're about normal amount of snowfall in Kitchener-Waterloo for the winter so far. And if we look at it for the rest of the winter, we still have on average about 30%, 32% more snow to come. So you haven't finished shoveling, plowing, and pushing quite yet. You're going to have to wait till maybe late April before we can put away the snow shovel. But you're right. I mean, we haven't seen many of these weather systems coming up the United States, and those are the ones like we've just had. This was from Texas, and it came northward, brought some moisture from, well, either the Gulf of America or the Gulf of Mexico, you pick, and it bumped into this cold air in Canada, and it gave us just the amounts of snow that we've seen. But this is really one of the first ones. We've had a few Alberta clippers and a couple of ones that there was one system that just drove right through the heart of Ontario between Christmas and New Year's. It went right up to Moosonee, and essentially what it did is brought rain because it was in warm temperatures, and so it melted both the look and the feel of winter, and then we had to start all over again when January came. But you're right, we haven't seen many of these systems, and those are the ones that sort of spread the same amount of snow from whether it be from Windsor to Kitchener to Ottawa over the province, and most of it has been sort of pockets of in the Lake Huron and Georgian Bay down in London area, and you in Kitchener get a bit of that blowing in and bringing you some white stuff, but it really has not been there've been a lot of melting temperatures, but boy, this last couple of days and the next couple of weeks and the next couple of weeks, it's about as wintry like as you can get in southern Ontario, and it's sort of interesting. It sort of coincided, Larry, with a La Nina. La Nina we hadn't talked about it very much, and we knew it was coming, and it was late coming, and people thought it was going to be weak. Well, it's begun to bite deep and hard, and this is certainly we're seeing the effects of it across all of North America. It's this colder and snowier conditions that have grabbed hold. February may be the shortest month, but so far it has been the snowiest and the coldest.
And I think I heard you say that we're not confident about putting away the shovels till April. So
yeah,
that's... I didn't want to hear that, but I guess it's the truth.
I know, but and that's not a forecast as much as looking at climate in the past and say, well, where are we in the kind of a season we're in? And so to come, if this was going to be an average rest of the winter, and that's a big assumption, but from Valentine's Day right through to the last snowflakes of the season, we would normally count in Kitchener-Waterloo another 50 centimeters of snow, or about 32% of what you normally would get. But as they say, I mean, that's just based on 30 years of records. It just tells you where you are in sort of the distribution of snow during the season. We're well beyond the halfway point, so there's more winter behind us than ahead of us. The days are getting longer by 3.5 to 4 minutes a day. So you can already feel walking on the downtown area of Kitchener-Waterloo, you can feel that kind of, when the sun is shining and there's no wind, you can feel that heat on your skin. So, we've survived most of it. We still have a little bit to come.
I always enjoy the conversations, David, and you give me great fodder for my elevator weather conversations I have with my
Great.
my
Nice to speak to you
here.
always. Bye-bye now.
Thank you. David Phillips is climatologist at Environment Canada. April, well, as you said, that's not a forecast, but generally that is right. We feel better about March and then April and the April showers and summer's around the corner. But snow in April is not strange to us here at all, is it? We hope not. But we'll get through the next few days, I think, is the challenge right now. This is 570 News Radio. Larry Fedoruk in for Mike Farwell. Back in a moment.
This is about one of the toughest moments of kind of winter. And the snow we got last night and early this morning is more than we've seen all this winter and all of last winter. So it's something that we're just kind of not accustomed to in recent months.
David Phillips, climatologist, Environment Canada, my guest moments ago. Larry Fedoruk in for Mike Farwell. Mike is traveling with the Rangers. David Phillips there talking about the weather. And David Phillips, it's like, do I make this comparison? It's like a Bob Cole in hockey to me. The late, great Bob Cole. And there's lots of great hockey people out there, among them Mike Farwell. But I'm just saying, when you heard Bob Cole, you knew that it was hockey in Canada. And when I hear David Phillips, I just know that's the voice of weather to me. I've always thought that. And as I said earlier, talked to him many times over the years on radio about various weather events. And he used to do a yearly calendar. He doesn't do it anymore, but he used to do a calendar for charity. And it was just the Canadian weather highlights. And I'll put in calendar form, and you could have weather highlights per day, on this day in 1982, the great whatever, that kind of thing. And he stopped doing that, but I wish he would do it again. Maybe bring it back sometime. But anyway, David Phillips talking about the storm that we've had. And I'll say again, and it's not mine. I saw this online, but it was, the snow coming in from Texas. Big storm, lots of snow, but at least it's tariff free. So there we are. That part is true. And as we're digging out, it's moving east. And by this afternoon, the Maritimes will really have to begin digging out as well. So it's a big one. It just took up a lot of Ontario and a lot of Quebec and a lot of Maritimes later on today, this big winter storm. And I try and be empathetic, and as I said earlier, I heard the scraping of the plows in my back parking lot. At about 3 a.m, it woke me up, and I was like, "Oh, what are you doing?" And then I thought, well, they're trying to make a few early passes for those people who have to get up early and travel, and at least get them out of the parking lot here. And have you ever seen those trucks? Just a truck with a plow in front of it. I see them sometimes in a winter past where we've had little or no snow all winter. And then I'll see one of these trucks with the plow in front of it parked somewhere. And I'll is that guy doing any business this winter? Is he doing okay? Does he get paid anyway? Is there just a contract? And whether you actually plow snow or not. And I always say, well, We may not like the snow, and it closes the schools and the museums and some stores, but somebody's livelihood is based on clearing the snow. Somebody has a job for the city based on clearing the snow. Somebody is an individual, private contractor based on clearing the snow. At my little strip mall near me, I noticed the last few winters they actually have what I call their own tractor with a plow in front of it, and it's just parked in the parking lot from December through to, March, April. It's just there. And I was like, that's kind of luxurious, right? You have your own snowplow. You don't need that tractor anywhere else. You don't move it around the region or whatever. You just keep it in that one parking lot. And I guess some guy shows up and starts it up. I don't know. It always happens when I'm not around, but they do it in the middle of the night and they clear the parking lot. And it's also too, I was talking earlier about my signs of spring, because in the parking lot at the malls, at various parking spaces or little lamppost islands or whatever, that's where they pile all the snow, right? And that big pile of snow is the last to melt in March and April. So March and April, sometimes we get, almost all the snow is gone everywhere, but that pile of snow, it's getting smaller, but it's still there. When that pile of snow finally goes to zero, that's when they're like, okay, spring. Right? So whatever. Anyway, more snow to come. You've been hearing the weather, and you'll hear again in moments. More snow coming on the weekend, and cold weather all through Family Day and beyond. Here we go. This is 570 News Radio. Back in a moment. Larry Fedoruk in for Mike Farwell. Valentine's Day tomorrow. What can you afford to do? Chocolates may be cost prohibitive. I did a podcast recently on chocolate. Actually, it was on the discontinuation of the Cherry Blossom Candy Bar. Hershey's Canada announced that about 4 weeks ago. And I did a podcast on it because we all remember the Cherry Blossom. And maybe we've forgotten about it, but it was still out there. It was first produced in the 1890s. That's how long that Cherry Blossom cube has been out there. The chocolate is not a cube, but the box is the cube, right? We all know the Cherry Blossom. So I looked into that, and I looked into 70% of the world's chocolate comes from two countries. Did you know this? From West African countries, Ghana and the Ivory Coast, Cote d'Ivoire. And so if there's anything there, storms or drought or some sort of blight, then there are fewer cocoa beans, which means it goes up. It's not like, well, we'll just go get it somewhere else. 70% of the world's chocolate. Anyway, it's a very interesting industry, too, that needs some investigation. I know they signed a law back in, I think it was 2008 in the States to ensure that chocolate or the cocoa powder, the cocoa bean is ethically sourced, no child labor, stuff like that. But then they couldn't get it done, so they pushed the deadline up to 2011, then to 2012, then to 2015, then to 2018, then to 2020, then to 2021. And I think they've set another deadline of 2025, but I don't know if you can guarantee that cocoa beans are ethically sourced even by the end of this year. It's a complicated, as most issues are, it's very complicated. But as a result of this concentration of the cocoa bean, anything happens in those two countries, climate-wise or otherwise, and we're paying more for chocolate. And from Christmas how expensive chocolate was, continues to be. I have a Valentine aisle at the drugstore where I go to. That's when I walk in, you can see the Valentine aisle, and I'm like, oh, those look good. I'll pick it up. And I look at the sticker price, and it's the sticker shock. And you're like, yeah, well, maybe no chocolate then. Maybe some other treat, I guess. Yeah. What if we became the 51st state militarily? Have we dared to think about that? Like, if there's an actual, if Trump was crazy enough to mobilize the military, there's a theory out there that would, in fact, destroy the United States. It's a conversation we're going to have next with a U of T professor. All right, looking forward to that when we return here on 570 News Radio.
Here's special guest host, Larry Fedoruk.
Hope you can stick with us. Next hour, we're going to talk about renovictions and renoviction bylaws for the city of Kitchener. We're going to talk with an advocacy group advocating for tenants, saying, I believe they're saying this is just not moving quickly enough, renoviction bylaws. But we'll get to that after 11 o'clock. 11:30, it's the Flipside, where we flip it over to you and we ask a fun question every week on the Flipside. Today's fun question, as in fun, as in not heavily political or any of those kind of things, not heavily issue-driven. What is your go-to winter comfort food? And are you having it today? That'll be our discussion, our fun talk after 11:30 on the Flipside. Right now on the program, as I've been mentioning, annexing Canada by the United States, would that destroy us? Would that destroy the United States? Now, we're talking perhaps a military annexation here. I don't know if you've thought about that possibility, but joining us to discuss, Associate Professor, Department of Political Science at the University of Toronto, Aisha Ahmed, is joining us. Professor Ahmed, thank you for joining us today.
Thanks for having me, Larry.
Are we talking about a military invasion, either the possibility or just a conjecture of what may happen?
Well, let's be clear. A military invasion of Canada is not imminent. And so if Canadians are worried, they don't need to get the rifle out of the shed today. Right now, we're talking about this because President Donald Trump and his administration simply won't shut up about annexing Canada. And they keep going on about using economic coercion, but annexation is a very violent word. And economic coercion would not result in Canada joining the United States or becoming a 51st state. And so that word has alarmed a lot of people. And so, if we play this tape out and actually think about it, though, would the United States actually be able to annex Canada, through violent military means? I think a lot of Canadians maybe get scared looking at the United States and its big, powerful army, thinking that we would have to wave the white flag. But the fact of the matter is, as an international security scholar who has been studying complex conflicts and interventions all over the world for 20 years, I can tell you that that is actually really not the case. And annexation of Canada is physically impossible, and this could never happen. And if the United States ever actually did try in this hypothetical situation of, physically trying to take over Canada, it would physically destroy them. It would be catastrophic and create an international security crisis well beyond anything they've seen in recent decades or in their entire existence.
Is it fair to compare this idea to a Russian invasion of Ukraine, or are there parallels there at all?
I think actually the Ukrainians have been fighting the Russians back using conventional military warfare, primarily funded through other countries. And so what they're doing is the equivalent of boxing, going pound for pound against a more powerful enemy. And I think the Canadians would be afraid to go pound for pound against the United States because the United States has power preponderance. But that's not how most asymmetric conflicts are fought. In fact, what's much more likely, if the United States ever dared to try to annex Canada, is the result would not be determined through a conventional war. It would be determined through an insurgency. And an insurgency favors a weaker party in that conflict and causes an enormous amount of damage. So while the Americans might have superior military power, they probably also still have that old mission accomplished banner that they had when George W. Bush brought it to Iraq in 2003. And that's the kind of security crisis that they would be creating by invading Canada. Now, the difference here would be that a few years later, when they realize that they've created an unstoppable insurgency and an impossible-to-solve security crisis, they wouldn't be able to run away because it would be happening in their own cities. And so the fact of the matter is Canadian geography and demographics would lend themselves towards a resistance-style insurgency that could go on for many, many years and easily attract the support of external actors that were interested in fomenting an insurgency on the North American continent. So in this scenario, It's wholly and entirely destructive to the United States to engage in this type of conflict on its own continent. Nobody in their right mind would choose that over having a friendly, peaceful neighbor who you're allied with and have positive relationships with. It would be like a murder-suicide.
Nobody in their right mind. Well, I'll leave that alone for a second. But
okay.
So I understand what you're saying about the geography, and we're just a vast, vast geographical nation. But in a war, you only have to take over key cities and key points, don't you?
Not true.
No, are you saying that might happen, but there would be an insurgency beyond that where we might go to our sheds and get our rifles?
I don't just think that. I know that. I can say it with absolute certainty. Sure, that, Iraq-style mission accomplished banner could be raised and you could take a stupid picture smiling with your thumbs up, but it would be inevitable that even if you rolled into cities, insurgencies are slow, thoughtful, sneaky, clever, and they go on for a really long time. And if you think about not only our northern geography, which is enormously amenable to an insurgency, with deep forests and rugged mountain terrains, it would be impossible to control and impossible to suppress. Also, it's not happening in a faraway country. And so insurgents can use very little effort to create extraordinary amounts of damage. It takes tens of billions of dollars to build an energy pipeline and a few thousand to blow one up. It would be spectacularly destructive. So no, you can't just take cities and then put up your mission accomplished banner. It will create a catastrophic outcome that would be not only tremendously costly in terms of blood and treasure to suppress, but it wouldn't work. In fact, if you look at every single approach to counterinsurgency that has been refined over the past 20 years and you apply it to a Canadian context, every single one of them fails. I've advised generals at the Pentagon on why their counterinsurgency strategies fail in parts of the world where they should succeed more. And so, look, all of this is hypothetical. The Americans are not gearing up to invade Canada tomorrow, but because they're not shutting up about annexing our country, it's probably worth it for us to remind them that they couldn't possibly do it even if they tried.
There you go. If this were to happen, would we have allies? The United States is very powerful. Of course, they seem to be treating their friends poorly. So I don't know, would they have allies? Would we have allies? I'm thinking of the old line of the enemy of my enemy is my friend. Would we have that kind of association with anyone, do you think?
Oh, that happens in every situation around the world where you will forget who your enemies of yesterday are and become friends with those parties that are willing to back you. But think right now today, who would be absolutely delighted, like tickled pink, by the idea of an insurgency embroiling the United States on its own continent? The Russians and the Chinese would love this. It would allow them to rise uncontested in their own regions. It would preoccupy American forces to the extreme, and it would essentially bankrupt and burn our entire continent, Canadians and Americans alike. So if the Americans did dare to do something as destructive as invade Canada and kill Canadians, the resulting insurgency, which would be inevitable no matter how we feel today, it would be physically inevitable for us not to have a major, large-scale, multiple hundreds of thousands of people involved in a resistance. And there's no way the Chinese and the Russians wouldn't, let that opportunity slide. I mean, it's an excellent opportunity for them on a shoestring budget to support an insurgency that meets their broader security interests without putting themselves on the front line. It always happens in every conflict around the world where that enemy of my friend, it's been, proven time and again. And we can know for certain that it would happen in this imagined nightmare scenario, but that's certainly not in anyone's interest to co-create.
Well, you watch these tanks rolling down the streets of cities around the world, and you think never here. And now this possibility kind of is in the back of a lot of people's minds. But I'm glad to have this conversation with you.
You know
about
what? No one should panic at this moment, but I think this is sort of like a moment of betrayal for Canadians, where a few months ago the idea of an American invasion was absolutely inconceivable, and today Canadians don't feel that way. And that says something very serious about the collapse of our relationship with the United States. And while I don't think you need to go to the shed and get out your rifle, I do think that our country needs to reevaluate its friendships and its relationships around the world.
Great point. And Professor Ahmed, what a great discussion. I appreciate your time today. Thank you.
You're very welcome, Larry. Have a great day.
You as well. Aisha Ahmed is a professor, associate professor, Department of Political Science, University of Toronto. Now, there's an expert. There's an expert that has advised Pentagon generals and generals around the world on insurgencies and this kinds of things. You know, perish the thought, but maybe not. Okay. More in a moment. This is 570 News Radio.
This is sort of like a moment of betrayal for Canadians, where a few months ago, the idea of an American invasion was absolutely inconceivable. And today, Canadians don't feel that way. And that says something very serious about the collapse of our relationship with the United States. And while I don't think you need to go to the shed and get out your rifle, I do think that our country needs to reevaluate its friendships and its relationships around the world.
That was a great conversation. I enjoyed it. I hope you did too. It's Larry Fedoruk in for Mike Farwell. That was Professor Aisha Ahmed, Department of Political Science at the University of Toronto, an expert in the area of global insurgencies and security concerns. And as we have to evaluate our customer relationship with the United States in imports and exports, we have to evaluate our security relationship with the United States because of this person, Donald Trump. But maybe in general, for the next Donald Trump or the next whomever who looks upon Canada as just, perhaps one day it'll just be a 51st state. I think it was John Manley, the former Liberal MP, I forget all the ministries he was involved in with Chrétien, but who wrote that, by the way, we wouldn't be the 51st state. We'd be 51 through 60. And it would be a whole other, perhaps, but regardless of how we would break it down politically, the discussion with Professor Ahmed was, it's an interesting one. What if they just decided to invade one day? And as Professor Ahmed said, it's not imminent, but we should start to reevaluate our relationship. It's interesting, too, and I'm going to tie this together as best I can, as quick as I can. When we talked about the enemy of my enemy is my friend, if the United States invaded us, would we suddenly be friends with China and Russia? And because they would be just rubbing their hands together at the possibility of a North American continental war between, the two previously friendly nations. It would be really interesting. As Professor said, not happening, not imminent, but when the United States was a manufacturing giant in the late 1800s, early 1900s, it was like phase 3 of the Industrial Revolution. It was, because the Industrial Revolution really started in the 1700s. I'm going too far back, but I'll, as I said, tie it together. They were able to pivot during both world wars and manufacture a lot of armaments for themselves and the Allies. They got rich. And they got paid in gold. By the end of World War II, the United States had stockpiled 80% of the world's gold, Fort Knox. And in 1944, over 40 countries got together in New Hampshire to discuss the world stability, both economically and militarily. And they, at that point, made the United States dollar the reserve currency for the planet, the world reserve currency. So how does this tie in? Well, for years now, because it was against the gold standard, and because Europe was in shambles, America became the world's #1 economy, and they had all this gold, and the dollar was the reserve currency in the world. It still is. We traded American dollars. Everybody does. If I'm a Canadian importer and I want to buy from a exporter in India, we don't deal in loonies, toonies, rupees. We deal in American dollars back and forth. We pay that premium to deal in the world reserve currency. Everybody does. And for years, people like China, Russia to an extent, have wanted a different world currency, another reserve world currency, because that's lucrative. And you become hugely rich and powerful because of this world reserve currency, which the United States has done. The EU tried it because they went, well, the lira and the franc and the mark and the, whatever is not as strong, the drachma, not as strong against the American dollar as a European currency would be. So they have the euro now. It's stronger, but it's still not the dollar. So the more America does to bankrupt themselves or hurt themselves financially, hurts their dollar, makes room for another world currency, which is also something like a China would really want. There you go. I hope I tied that together. Bob, if you want to hang on, you're going to be next when we return here on 570 News Radio. I'm Larry Fedoruk in for Mike Farwell. Bob, you're on. First of all, thanks for holding, Bob. And second of all, go ahead.
Hey, morning, Larry. How you been today?
I'm good. How are you?
Oh, man, all this snow. My back's hurting already. Anyways,
well, be careful out there.
I can see three reasons why Trump wants Canada. It's for our land, our water, and our minerals. Because down there, they basically destroyed their land, right, by poking all them holes in it and not capping all the wells proper, and they bury all this other crap down in there, and now they're SOL. They're running out of land, out of water, and they need us. So, why not?
I think you nailed it, Bob. I think you nailed it.
Yeah. Okay, brother, you take care.
You bet. That's it, man. Water, minerals, and what did you just say? Three things. Water, land, and minerals, I guess. And that those are things, by the way, that maybe not the water and the land so much, but the minerals certainly have been touted by Canadian leadership in the trade discussions. In other words, why would you put a tariff on trades right now when, in fact, you need a lot of these minerals for the future of manufacturing? Because it's steel and aluminum, yes, but a lot of these minerals involved in a lot of the new technology are available in Canada, a stable country. You see, it's like a lot of it is like is compared to oil, because oil, the old line about oil, there's a lot of it where you don't need it and it's needed where it ain't, that kind of thing. And a lot of oil, Middle East, in politically unstable areas, or potentially politically unstable areas. And it seems to be a lot of the minerals we need for new tech are in those kinds of areas as well, except for Canada. Now, Canada, we have it's the tar sands. Let's not call them anything else. It's what they are. We have a lot of dirty oil. So that's always been difficult. But Canada has a lot of oil. The other thing we have, too, is a lot of minerals. And they aren't dirty, if you will. The challenge in getting them is the mining challenge is the same as any mining challenges. Whereas opposed to oil, it's a different challenge because we've got all this dirty oil, so to speak. Well, but yeah, Bob, great call. Thank you. We're going to talk about renoviction bylaws for the city of Kitchener and an advocacy group who wants to see these happen. That's next here on 570 News Radio.
Here's special guest host, Larry Fedoruk.
It's Thursday. This just in, it's Thursday. All right. And, on Thursdays after 11:30, we do something called the Flipside, where we flip it over to you and we ask a lighter kind of question. In other words, not issue-driven or political in any way. At least we try not to do so. And today we've come up with, what is your go-to winter comfort food? So think about that and tell me after 11:30 on the flip side. What is your winter go-to comfort food? I got a couple. I'll share them after 11:30. As a matter of fact, I got one that I was going to make today, except I don't have the ingredients, I guess. Yesterday I was out yesterday and I was trying to buy ahead and buy some extra storm chips and stuff like that, so I wouldn't have to go out during all the snow and stuff, which I'm able to do, and work from home and all that kind of stuff. I was very happy about that. So I went out and I thought I should buy this for my winter comfort food, and then I changed my mind for some reason at the time, and now I regret it. But nevertheless, we'll have the food discussion just ahead of lunch after 11:30. Between noon and 1 today, it is our daily 12 o'clock Talkback Hour, where we totally throw it open to you and ask you whatever's on your mind, whatever you want to talk about, good, bad, or otherwise. It's all up to you, noon till 1 on the 12 o'clock Talkback Hour. Right now in the program, the City of Kitchener is looking at some renoviction bylaws that they want to find out what's out there and see what's applicable and see if we can institute some renoviction bylaws in the next couple of years or the next year or so, I guess. Joining us to talk about this, she's the interim chair of the Welland Region Acorn Advocacy Group. Jackie Wells is joining us. Hello, Jackie.
Hello.
How are you today?
I'm pretty good. How are you?
I'm good. Good. Tell me about Acorn, first of all, because it's a national group, but they have a Waterloo Region branch as well, so to speak.
Yeah, so just to kind of correct you, I am the interim chair of the Waterloo Region chapter. So ACORN is, it stands for Association of Community Organization for Reform Now. It's a community and tenant union made up of low and moderate income people who fight for our rights. We're member-led, which means our members decide what issues we work on and how we work on them. And across Canada, we have over 180,000 members in various chapters. And importantly, we're independent from governments and big corporations because they're the ones we're often fighting for in order to have change. And that's why we're structured like a union and that we're membership-driven and membership-funded. Now,
as far as this group goes, there's a lot of things you would want to reform or a lot of things you'd be fighting for, but renoviction is right up there because that's a problem, certainly in the region, but I think a lot of places, is it not?
Oh, yeah, you're absolutely right. Our members every year vote on our priority issues to work on for that year. And for the last 2 years, our members have voted on fighting for a renoviction bylaw across Waterloo Region as its most important priority. And that's because we've seen, according to an ACORN renoviction report, a close to 300% increase in the number of renovictions, otherwise known as N13s, that were filed between 2017 and 2022. And for Kitchener-Waterloo specifically, we saw a 113% increase. And currently, Kitchener is number 6 in the province for the number of renovictions filed during that time frame. Importantly, though, we want to highlight that this data really is not comprehensive because many renovictions do not even make it to the landlord and tenant board, and many tenants face harassment and intimidation by their landlords in order to leave before it even gets to an LTB hearing. Specifically, it doesn't include, in our region, tenants at 250 Frederick Street or 141 and 149 Borden Avenue who have the same landlord who is trying to renovict the tenants there. Importantly, I just want to highlight that Kitchener is actually the second fastest growing city in the country. And within the region, Kitchener has a higher proportion of renters relative to the other cities in the region. And we also know that 2/3 of renters will never own their own home. So a lot of renters need long-term stability in their apartments and their rental tenures. And unfortunately, renovictions exploit loopholes in existing laws that threaten every single tenant and their ability to stay in their home long term. We also know that new so-called affordable units that are being built are not affordable. And despite higher vacancy rates, so in Kitchener, the CMHC data from fall of this past year showed that we have a higher vacancy rate for apartments in the last 30 years. It's at 3.6%. And despite this, we're not seeing market rents go down. So it's extremely important to preserve people living in their current affordable apartments that are rent controlled.
I'm sure everybody knows what a renoviction is, but it's basically getting around regulations of eviction under the guise of renovations, which may or may not happen. But anyway, you get people out, you allegedly renovate and charge more, and it's a little deeper than that, but that's the gist of it. Now, renoviction bylaws, do they exist? I am thinking Hamilton has some. What are some of the actual laws in place to battle renovictions?
Yeah, great question. So Hamilton was the first in Ontario. The first in Canada was actually all the way in BC in New Westminster. But Hamilton was the first in this province, and they passed their renoviction bylaw last January, so January of 2024, and it just took effect of January 2025. Importantly, Toronto has just passed a renoviction bylaw, which will take effect in July of this year as well. London passed their own renoviction bylaw last summer. We also have smaller communities that are currently investigating passing their own renoviction bylaws. So even smaller communities such as Kawartha Lakes. We also know Ottawa's investigating passing their own municipal renoviction bylaw. And the reason why these are important is because despite ACORN and its members, as well as many other organizations fighting for renoviction protections, have advocated at the provincial level for 7 years. And in the 7 years of this provincial government, we haven't seen any action taken to protect tenants against renovictions. So importantly, a municipal bylaw, such as one that we want passed in Kitchener, would include something like requiring the landlord to register with the city for a license to renovate within a week of giving tenants their N13 notice. We want all building permits necessary for the renovictions provided with the application. We want a qualified engineer that will approve, that will actually require the unit to be vacant for the renovations. So a lot of the times, the landlords don't even need to prove that the unit needs to be vacant for such renovations. And most importantly, we need tenants to be protected with temporary accommodations or rent gap payments paid for by the landlord to house the tenant while the renovations are happening, which incentivizes landlords to not do renovictions in the first place, and to get the tenant housed back in their unit as quickly as possible.
Okay. Kitchener is commissioned a study. I guess they're looking at a study out in June. They're looking at renoviction bylaws by next year. Are you saying none of this is soon enough, or it could go a little faster? Yeah.
ACORN and its members, as well as many others, totally think it could happen much faster. So this past Monday night, we had a council meeting discussing this, and as one tenant delegate put it towards council, they noted that council spent over 4 hours discussing the rezoning of a new condo development to have 10 so-called affordable units built, but they didn't invest nearly as much time involving discussing passing a renoviction bylaw, which we know would save hundreds, if not thousands, of homes. And ACORN has been campaigning for this bylaw in Kitchener since early 2023. So if Kitchener City Council and staff had taken action sooner, tenants wouldn't be stuck waiting for the city to decide whether they're going to protect people's homes or not. We're glad that they're at least researching the subject, but we're not happy that the council gave staff a whole year to do this research when other cities have already had a bylaw passed in less than that time. We also see at these meetings that council and staff keep giving a continual rotation of arguments for why they say they can't do it right now. They'll say it's a budgetary issue when we know that in other cities, these renoviction bylaws are actually self-funded. They'll say that it's a staff workload issue, but we say they need to reprioritize since this is a very important issue affecting so many of their constituents. They'll also say that it's not their jurisdiction. They say it's the province's job. But we've actually seen other cities in this province pass their own bylaws, so that doesn't, the evidence doesn't support that claim. So the other thing that they keep asking for is more data, but we say, how much more data did they need? There are countless tenants who have come forward to delegate at this point at these council meetings, and we know that all the tenants at 250 Frederick are receiving N13 notices, and we also know that at 141 and 149 Borden, the tenants there are facing renoviction. So how many tenants need to be thrown out of their homes before the city decides that they have enough data? Yeah, they're also claiming that this two-tiered municipality, so between the region of Waterloo and the cities, makes it impossible or much more difficult to do this. However, I want to point out that the city of Kitchener just passed a rental replacement bylaw in June of 2024 that does essentially the same thing, but for demolitions. So why can't they use the same framework for renovictions?
Well, it sounds like a lot of excuses coming your way, and you've really painted a picture here. Jackie Wells, thank you. This is great information. Thank you very much for your time.
Oh, thank you so much for giving us the time. It's really important, and we really appreciate you giving us the time to talk about it.
You bet. Jackie Wells is interim chair of the Waterloo Region ACORN group, which is a national group with I'm just calling them chapters, individual groups throughout Canada and Waterloo region. Jackie Wells there. More in a moment. 570 News Radio.
We need tenants to be protected with temporary accommodations or rent gap payments paid for by the landlord to house the tenant while the renovations are happening, which incentivizes landlords to not do renovictions in the first place and to get the tenant housed back in their unit as quickly as possible.
Jackie Wells, my guest. I'm Larry Fedoruk, sitting in for Mike Farwell. Jackie joining us a moment ago. She was talking about renoviction and renoviction bylaws for the city of Kitchener. Jackie is interim chair of the Waterloo region chapter of Acorn. Here's Patrick. Patrick, go ahead. You're on 570 News Radio.
So there's a little more than just renovictions. My brother, who was in supportive mental housing, his apartment, the sewage backed up, the toilet. They moved him to another place, charged him rent on both locations, as well as had him sign an agreement to reimburse for the cost of repair and cleanup at $50 a month to be deducted off of his ODSP check. And I have all his stubs where it shows it was deducted, it was garnished. The rent receipt does not reflect that deduction. And yeah, they charged him almost $3,000. And
wow.
This is, yeah. So I've tried to go public with this, and, you know, like this place, one, it's illegal, and two, it's more than just renoviction. They'll do what they want.
Now, are they claiming the backup was his fault somehow, or I don't understand how they could charge him for fixing?
Nope, they don't claim the backup was his fault. It was a sewage backup, and then so the total bill, it's itemized, and it shows that they charged him for moving his items, which they never did. They wound up throwing them out. They billed him for that. They billed him for the second residence. Yeah. And on top of it, so they told ODSP the $50 a month payment for the reimbursement of the cleanup and everything, ODSP deducted it as rent.
Wow.
On a separate line. So it had his rent direct pay, and then it had a second deduction of $50 a month.
Now, I'm going to assume, Patrick, that you've made the calls. You said you tried to go public. You've been battling this for some time. Have you talked to the people at Acorn?
No, and that's why I'm calling in, because maybe they can help, because it's illegal.
Right. Thank you for the call, Patrick. It sure sounds that way. Like I'm not a legal expert. I'm not a tenant expert, but just on first blush, it's like, are you kidding? How can somebody get away with that? I would say reach out to the people at Acorn, advocacy group for tenants, and see if by power of membership, by power of numbers, that they could actually make some calls on you and your brother's behalf. It's an incredible story. Incredible story. This is 570 News Radio. Back in a moment. Larry Fedoruk in for Mike Farwell. If you want to join the show, feel free. Here's Bill. Bill, go ahead.
Hi, yes, good day. This is my second time calling in over a little while ago, and you're talking about the renovictions.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, I have quite the experience with being renovicted over 5 years ago. And way the landlords were treating not only my family, but the units that were around was astonishing. I know with the landlord that we were dealing with had a very viscous environment in their offices, and screaming and hollering between the owner and the employees, and that filtered on down to us. And so they, to renovict us, they come up with every dirty trick they can in the book that's, well, apparently legal and all that, and they even make up stuff. And that's not stopping, not even with the laws that have just been passed in the provinces and all that. It's just getting more frustrated. So on today, I am now like rent evicted. I cannot get a letter of recommendation from anybody, and to find a place is next near to impossible. And finding it really frustrating that we can't go forward. We're just stuck in a groove. When I was rent evicted out of the unit, I was basically with my wife, who just had 2 knee surgeries. We were homeless, and we basically lived out of a truck and a trailer for about 3 months. Try to do long-term accommodations and motels and all that. Trying to find something that's reasonable within our pay grade, and that was really difficult because we dealt with more hostility because they didn't want us in there for various reasons. We talked about motels and all that, but we had to stay in Brantford at a place called Home to Suites over the winter, and basically that was like $2,000 a month as it is, which was twice our rent anyways. So we were able to keep warm, and then we were able to secure accommodations with the family. And
Bill, thanks for the call. I'm up against the break here, man, just for time, but I appreciate you adding your voice to the story of renoviction bylaws needed in Kitchener sooner than later. I know they have a study going on, but the bylaws are out there. We know what they can be if we just want to institute them. This is 570 News Radio.
Here's special guest host, Larry Fedoric.
All right, the flip side. I love doing the flip side, but I'm filling in for Mike Farwell. It's just a fun question, not really issue-driven or anything. We just kind of get your thoughts on this, that, or the other. Specifically today, the question is, what is your go-to winter comfort food? Is it the mashed potatoes? Is it the mashed potatoes? Is it really the mashed potatoes with the gravy? I love the mashed potatoes. Okay. Yeah, I guess I probably have several that would be on there. But let me know, what is your go-to winter comfort food? And, would you be having it today or tomorrow or the weekend? Let us know. 519-570-2545. That's 519-570-2545. 1-800-570-5715 or star 570. I had a beef stew recipe that I've had for years and years and years. That was one, and it was great too because I could, as a single person, I could make the full recipe and then freeze a couple of portions of it, have it for a couple of days, freeze the rest, and then just pop it in whenever I felt like it again. And it's such a basic one too. I mean, there's the broth and the stock and the spices, but basically it's just beef, potatoes, carrots, onions, and a little bit of celery. And I would tell this to people, and people go, "Oh, that sounds good. You should put corn in there." And I'm like, no, this is the recipe. Yeah, I really like green beans. No. The beauty of it is its simplicity. So a nice stew, like people do chili. I did some chili before the Super Bowl and froze a bunch of that. So that's a good one. What else you got? What is your winter comfort food, your go-to winter comfort food? So lately, and by lately I mean last year and this year, I started making onion soup. My own. Not just a little envelope that, has anybody ever used that envelope of onion soup to make onion soup? Or you just put it in the sour cream to make the dip, right? Nobody actually uses it for soup, do they? So no, I don't. I make it from scratch, but it's so simple because it's just onions and beef stock. And people, when they think of French onion soup, they think of the whole bowl with the big crouton in it, right? And the cheese, and it's baked, and that's great. Like I do love that. But I don't do that. My favorite part of the onion soup, when I'd have it in a restaurant, was the soup, was the broth and the onions. So I'm like, well, I can make that and just have, a big piece of bread on the side. So what you do is you just get two big, and I don't mean this to be, you don't have to share your recipes with me, but I'll share mine with you real quickly. Because I love to mess around in the kitchen. It's just two big white onions, slice them up, a little bit of olive oil, and like medium heat. You don't want to brown the onions unless you really like that taste. If you accidentally brown a couple of onions, it's not a waste, it's fine. But I generally don't like to brown them. I just let them cook, partly covered, so that they steam as well as kind of cook in the pot for like 45 minutes, like forever, till they're almost mushed, till they're super soft. And then you add the beef stock, like just enough, like 1 carton is usually fine, and salt, pepper, and a little bit of thyme. Now be careful on the thyme, not too much. Even if you love it, it can take over the entire recipe. You don't want that. And then cook that for as long as you want. Let it simmer all afternoon. But usually a half an hour to an hour is fine. And then right at the end, a little bit of sherry, or I'll use like a 1/4 cup of red wine. And that goes, for me, at the end. I don't think the recipe says just put it in at the end, but I like putting it at the end and just getting it heated up a little bit. I don't like it to cook all day with the wine. And cooking sherry's fine. I don't really have sherry around, but I always have, always a red wine around. So just a little red wine at the end. And I'm telling you. And again, I was out yesterday and I was like, okay, it's going to be snowy and I'm filling in for Mike, but I work from home so I can stay indoors, which is great. I'm blessed working from home. This is so cool. And I'm going to do this. I'm going to work from home. And I'm going to make onion soup. Then I'm out shopping, picking up a couple of things. And for some reason, I don't buy the onions and the beef stock. I just don't. I'm like, nah, you know what? I don't know if I want it. I'll make it next. And now I just regret it because it's like, that's all I want today. And I guess I could go out. I could go out and get the ingredients. I guess I could get on one of those apps and just order the ingredients and have them delivered to my house. But I'm not going to do that. I'm going to have something else, which will be fine. Hey, I'm thankful for every meal I'm allowed to have. It's not like you should be so lucky to have. Some people don't have meal. I get it. But why didn't I get the stuff yesterday? I don't know. So I'll have to have it on the weekend or something to look forward to. A big pot of onion soup. It is pretty good. You don't need the cheese and the bread. You can just have the bread on the side. It's just it's a great winter comfort food. So, all right, you're not reacting so far, which is fine. It's not mandatory, but for some reason I thought I would get a lot of reaction to this question when I came up with it. Perhaps I was incorrect. But the flip side question is, what is your go-to winter comfort food? What is your go-to winter comfort food? And have you had it? How many times have you had it in the winter? It's been a winter. We've had winter. 519-570-2545. That's 519-570-2545. 1-800-570-5715. That is toll free, obviously, and star 570 on your cell phone. The flip side question: what is your go-to winter comfort food? What is it one of the obvious ones like, the sauces, the chilies, the beef stews, the soups, the things like that? Something that's just, the mere thought of it kind of warms you and does it. Here we have who do we have? Do we have George? George, go ahead.
Yeah, Larry, good morning.
Good morning.
By the way, you were right on about that beef stew recipe you had. If someone said to me, add corn, no corn. I like what you had in it. You don't need
just
to
the basics.
Hello?
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, and matter of fact, if you add anything more than what you mentioned, I actually think it would ruin it.
Yeah, it's you know what? It doesn't ruin it. It's just different.
It just becomes more, and what I like the simplicity of it. I like those extra stuff that you added, but that's it. And then here's the funny part. I was going to phone in and let you know what my food of choice is, and then you mentioned it. It would be French onion soup on a day like this.
Yeah. Now, do you go the full tilt with all the cheese and everything?
You know, I do like that. Like when they have it in the oven, it's baked, everything looks good. But that kind of stuff I leave for my wife. I don't go too deep into a more complicated French onion soup. If I make it, it'll be very simple, just be broth and onions. But I like when she goes all the way, and it looks like an authentic. And those, not ceramic, but what do they call those?
Yeah, they're like crockery or something, the big thick bowls, yeah.
That's it. And I love the whole fact it has a little handle on it, and you got the nice big cheese on top. It looks very authentic.
That sounds good. Now I'm just regretting more that I didn't buy the ingredients, but I'll have it next couple of days. George, thanks for the call. It's the flip side. What is your go-to winter comfort food is the question. More in a moment on 570 News Radio. Larry Fedoruk in for Mike Farwell. 519-570-2545. 1-800-570-5715. Star 570. On your cell, the flip side question, what is your go-to winter comfort food on a day like today? What would be great? On the French onion soup thing, I've become lactose intolerant in my later years here. I don't know why. And it's weird because I can have certain things like an old, very old sharp cheddar or a yogurt, but I can't have a glass of milk with cookies or just a regular pizza, for example, something like that. It depends. And I know why that is, because of the enzymes that are there or not there on certain dairy products, but so I got to be careful with the cheese on the onion soup, which I actually love just the broth and the onions more anyway. Let's go, Sean. Sean, you're on the flip side. Go ahead.
My go-to comfort food on a day like today is a good old English fry-up. Okay, you got to start with for dinner. You got to start with the sausages, and then you got to start with the eggs, sunny side, and now chips. You probably call them French fries, but I call them chips, as in sausage and chips, egg and chips. You know what I mean?
Yes, sir.
Yeah, you hand cut them nice and fat, and then you got to throw in the baked beans. So you're talking eggs, chips, baked beans, and pork sausages. That's a good old English fry up for dinner on a nice cold day. Maybe some brown sauce to go with.
Yeah. Boy, that sounds good. That sounds good.
It is. It is really good.
Appreciate the call. Thank you. Yeah, I know that they're called chips. What we call fries, they call chips. What we call chips, they call crisps. It's a weird country. It's England, but they really have never learned English. I'm kidding. It's a joke. But the English fry-up, yeah, that sounds good. Ron, go ahead. Ron, you're on the flip side.
So my go-to is pierogies. And I'm not talking about any type of pierogi. I'm talking like your basic everyday potato and onion pierogi with your butter and onions grilled up together and just poured on top of the pierogies after you fry them. So good.
You fry yours. Okay. See, I'm Ukrainian heritage. We have fried them, but we just boil them and have them that way with the onion and the butter.
I've done that too. And I am Ukrainian also. Like, but I have a background, like my dad's side was Ukrainian. So I learned how to make them from scratch too. But I found a actual place that is that does it the same way as we would make them, but they package them frozen and they're fresh from a company called Supreme Pierogies.
All right. Yeah. Good shout out there. Yeah, that's good. Ron, thanks for the call. Yeah. See, now pierogies I have frozen ones. I learned to make them from scratch from my mom, and I can make them from scratch, but they are labor intensive. You don't just whip it up. It's a whole thing. And so I just buy, I find a brand that's frozen, that's close will count in an emergency. And the pierogies, yeah, great comfort food. Jersey Bill, go ahead. You're on the flip side.
Yeah, it's a great topic. Comfort food in these uncomfortable times, eh?
Yeah, I guess so, yeah.
Yeah. So, this is something I do all year round, but it works especially well in the winter, and that is the way I make my oatmeal. So I use I try to get, good Canadian steel-cut oats, and then I use it. I put some butter in the pan or the pot that I'm making it in, and then I put a splash of another Canadian ingredient, which is the sortilege maple whiskey. And,
okay. Wow.
So that then I'll throw the water in, and then I'll put the oats in, and make enough for a few days. But and then to eat it, I'll usually put some cold cereal, some maybe a flax type cereal on top of it, and then I'll use, instead of milk, I'll use the kefir, which would be good for you, because I think kefir is one of those things your body could tolerate rather than the whole milk. Yeah, and then I also will usually cut a banana and whatever kind of berry fruit. Blueberries, raspberries, and there's this other one that we call golden berries from Colombia, and they're a little tart, and they also add to it. So that's my breakfast. I try to eat every day, and it seems to work very well for me, and it's my go-to comfort food.
Thank you, Jersey Bill. Great call. You're like the opposite of the sausages and eggs fry up. Is that right? Isn't it? It's the exact opposite of that. Sounds so healthy and good. One more before the break. Grant, go ahead. Grant, you're on the flip side.
Yeah, on occasion I like to order this pizza from Pizza Nova. It's Zinger pizza. And,
all right.
And it's
what's in that? What's in Zinger?
It's a hot honey drizzle that they put on the pizza, and they have a whole wheat thin sliced pizza. So yeah, I could eat the whole thing in one sitting, and I have done it. But okay. I figure it's a thin slice, so I don't think you're going to get all that fat. And this other guy that just said about his oatmeal, I want him to come over and do mine. Yeah, me.
Yeah, cook up a batch. Isn't that true? Hey, Grant, thanks for the call. Hey, you know what? When it comes to comfort food, you can't go wrong with pizza. It's an old joke, and pardon me if it's offensive, I'm sorry, but I'm saying it anyway. The old joke about pizza is like sex, because even when it's bad, it's still pretty good. I've always loved that joke, and it's so correct. Pizza is a great comfort food. More of your go-to winter comfort foods on the flip side in a moment, 570 News Radio. Larry Fedorican from Mike Farwell. What's your go-to winter comfort food? A lot of it does involve cheese, doesn't it? And, pizza does, of course. I don't know. I was talking earlier about being lactose intolerant over these last few years. Somebody recommended to me Lactaid pills. I think that's the brand name. I don't mean to plug a brand name here, but that's what they are. And I've tried those. Those are pretty good. Those usually work pretty good for me. And the way you use Lactaid pills, if you can't tolerate pizza, but you want to have some, you pop a couple of Lactaid pills, you just chew them up, and you should be okay with the pizza. Now, then if you're going to have more pizza, you probably need another couple of tabs. But I was having this discussion. My daughter's friend, my daughter said to me, she goes, I got a friend, big family. So when they have family gatherings, it's like 25 people, and almost everybody is lactose intolerant in the family. So what they have is they put out a big bowl of Lactaid pills, almost like a big bowl of mints. They just pour a big bowl and they put them in isn't this funny? They put them in the center of the table, and then they just have, pizzas and cream sauces and whipped cream cakes and pies and whatever they just eat whatever they want, but everybody just has a big communal bowl of lactate pills. Isn't that nice? Isn't that nice? But and this, going back to the original part of this story, was the onion soup that I like to make, where I don't, I didn't do cheese because of the lactose intolerance. And I thought to myself, well, you know what? What I enjoy most about the onion soup in the restaurant, what I used to really enjoy most, not that you don't enjoy the cheese and the crouton and everything, is delicious, of course it is, but was getting down to that broth. And in a restaurant, when you get that small bowl of onion soup, there isn't that much broth and onion in there, because the crouton sucks it most of it. The big slice of bread, ends up taking most of it, and then the cheese. So when you make onion soup that's just onions and broth and stock and a few spices, then it's delicious. It is delicious. So winter comfort food. Hope, in general terms, hope everybody has enough to eat, first of all. Secondly, it's nice to be able to have the choice of having a go-to comfort food when you can on a day, and not that, somebody said about their comfort food, I do it all year round. It's not just winter. There is a certain, you try not, what I'm trying to say here, I don't know. You try not to make food the thing, in other words, right? Like that's where the answer, I'm having a tough day, so I'm going to have a large bowl of mashed potatoes. But you try and not use food as the crutch. But there are just times when it's a comfort. That's what it's called. It's just a comfort. Anyway, thank you for your calls. On the flip side, if you have a comfort food, and because we're out of time here, but if you have one, just hang on, and we can also throw that into our 12 o'clock Talkback Hour, which is coming up next. So every day between noon and 1, 12 o'clock Talkback Hour, where it's all on you. What do you feel like talking about? If it's a comfort food or something else, if it's politics or tariffs or elections or whatever it is, let me know on the 12 o'clock Talkback Hour. That's next on 570 News Radio.
Here's special guest host, Larry Fedoric.
Take out the papers and the trash, or you don't get no spending cash. If you don't scrub that kitchen floor, you ain't gonna rock and roll no more.
Don't talk back.
You talk back. You talk back. 12 o'clock Talkback Hour at 519-570-2545. 1-800-570-5715. Toll free. Star 570 on your cell. What do you want to talk about? The weather? Sure, why not? Hey, the weather. And we have, of course, provincial election coming up. You just heard the news story updating what the provincial leaders are doing. It's interesting. It's not a criticism. It's just an observation that Doug Ford has campaigned basically out of Washington, D.C. these last couple of days in his role as Premier of Ontario. Interesting, too, on a federal level, because we have that you could talk about as well, the federal Liberal leadership. And in this case, it's the party in power federally. So the person they choose will become the prime minister for however a brief period of time, we don't know. But that person will be prime minister as of March 9th. So there is that. And, I was thinking about this the other day. When you get fired from a job, and that's happened to me a couple of times, I called it downsizing, but it's fired. Fired without, it was nothing I did. It was just, I'm sorry, you're old, you make too much money, get out of here. And when you're fired, what happens is they fire you, and then you hand in your pass card, and you're escorted out of the building, and you make arrangements to get your stuff on some other day on a supervised visit. That's it. You're gone. You're out. And in radio and media, they rarely speak of you again because you're gone. It's like you never existed there. Here's the prime minister. You're fired, Justin. Sorry. Thanks, but no thanks. And he's got to stay on the job. And it's a time when he has to stay on the job. He can't just go, well, I'm out. So put my feet up, take that vacation. He, in fact, is got everything else that we all have as Canadians in front of us right now, which is Donald Trump and the threat of U.S. tariffs and 51st state threats, right? So he's out there working. He's out there working. Whether you like him or not, he's got to work right up until March the 9th, even though he's been fired. So good luck on that. We can talk about that, the federal leadership, the provincial election, the weather, what else we got going. Blue Jays spring training, I mentioned that earlier. Always a sign of spring, even though it's not per se. It's a sign that they're in spring training, but it's always nice to hear. Today is day one of spring training for the Blue Jays. Pitchers and catchers report. Why do they get to go in first? I guess they go in first because they do. Anything that's on your mind, let me know. I was, as you know, or maybe you don't, but sometimes I mention it here when I'm filling in for Mike. I call myself semi-retired. That's how I like, having a job occasionally, like filling in for Mike. I have a podcast, a few other things that I kind of dabble in. And I'm usually working out of home. And I noticed one day a few weeks ago that Matlock is on in the mornings. Okay? Matlock. Yeah. And a few other old shows, some of which I like, some of which I don't. So I thought, well, instead of watching the news all day, which I do, maybe I'll watch some of these old shows occasionally. But do I want to watch Matlock? Because that's what a stereotype I've become, right? Old semi-retired guy watching Matlock yelling at the TV like Grandpa Simpson. I don't want to be doing that. Do I? Nah. No, but no, let's just watch it. So I watch it one day, and it's not bad. I'm like, well, okay. I've become the person I dreaded. Old guy said, why don't I get the slippers on, some cocoa, and watch the Matlock every day, right? Well, I don't watch it every day, but I did watch it that one time, and I was like, this isn't bad. I sort of see the appeal of Matlock. It's well done. Well done show. So then I decide to watch it a second time. This is Matlock I'm talking about, Andy Griffith. Show's based in Atlanta, right? So he's a good old boy, Southern lawyer, fighting for justice. And the premise of Matlock is a hooker gets murdered. Now, she's a hooker, but she's a professional escort. She belongs to an escort agency, but she is a hooker. And she's murdered because she was putting the pressure on some of her clients to pay more because, they were, well, one was a senator, a U.S. senator. The other one was a talk show host. And the third one was a reverend at a church. And those were the three main suspects because she was pressuring them for money and she was murdered. And so was her madam, the woman, her pimp, basically, the woman who runs the agency. She's the one that got charged with the murder, and she had a big crush on Matlock. She was always trying to get Matlock over to her house. And the reverend, as it turns out, was not one of her clients. Turns out he was her father from back when she was a kid. He was a raging, violent alcoholic who she blamed for the death of her sister, and he certainly changed his life, found Jesus, and became a reverend. Anyway, the point of the story is, I'm like, this is Matlock? This is Matlock. It's a hookers and senators and blackmail and violent alcohol. It's like, come on. When did Matlock go all deep and adult on us? It's supposed to be pretty, I know people get murdered on Matlock, but not like this. This is pretty adult, man. We should have had a disclaimer on it. Oh, my goodness. It violated my sensitivities. It did. Marcus, go ahead. You're on the 12 o'clock Talkback Hour.
Yeah, hello, sir. How you doing?
I'm good. How are you?
Good. Your neighbors to the south here. Being an American citizen, I got relatives that live in Toronto, Guelph, and far as Chatham, Ontario.
Mm-hmm.
And I heard one of your competing stations said, if President Trump goes along with this 25% tariff, it'll affect something like 1,000 employees in the steel industry and such. And you would figure President Trudeau, Justin, not his daddy, Justin, would be over there, get it on a plane, going to the UK and going to Australia and deal with the auto industries in those countries and under license start producing cars that appeal to the Canadian people there. This man, Donald Trump, is not to be trusted. He's nobody's friend. He'll throw his own children under a freight train. It's all about his aggrandizement. He doesn't care about nothing. And there's no need to lose thousands of jobs, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of jobs in your country because of a guy like this. The Canadians can manufacture anything as good as anybody else or even better, a lot of stuff. And I don't know why President Trudeau is not over there cutting a deal with Ford of Australia, what's left of Holden, whatever is over there in Australia and the British. The UK got a lot of automobiles. They still manufacture what they call over there a lot of different marks that would appeal to Canadians and got to retool the factories.
Yeah. He was just over there. He just got home.
You need to get back over.
Yeah, I guess. But I understand your point, Marcus. Thanks for the call. We'll pick more of this up on the 12 o'clock Talkback Hour or whatever else you want to talk about. It's up to you when we return here on 570 News Radio. Working for Mike Farwell. Star 570 on yourself for the 12 o'clock Talkback Hour. Toll free is 1-800-570-5715. If you're in the region, just give us a call at 519-570-2545. Just to wrap a little bit of Marcus's call there about Trudeau has to get on this. You know, it's in his defense. He was just in Europe and meeting with EU and other officials over there. And you can bet that other trade deals were being talked about. But here's the problem. And this is in his defense. Number one, when Trump threatened the tariffs and Trudeau was already resigned, he resigned January 6th after a lot of pressure. So he's in this tenuous position. What can he say? What can he do? He goes to Europe. He's making the deals, but they're all looking at him going, well, in a month, you're not prime minister, so thanks. We'll talk to your successor. So there is that. There's that lame duck quality. But he's still, he's still on the job. He's still on the job after being fired. So as I said earlier, most jobs you're escorted out the door when you're fired. He's got to work. He's got to continue to work for 2 months until they pick a new leader. Secondly, he did make the call after everybody's like, what do we do? What do we do? We got to have a Team Canada approach, and the premiers get together and they travel to Washington, and so does Dominic LeBlanc and Melanie Joly and all these people working. Trudeau picked up the phone and called Trump, and Trump stayed the tariffs for 30 days and then initiated tariffs on steel and aluminum anyway. But the tariffs on everything else stayed. So at least we've still got a couple of weeks to go on that before we find out what's next. So he did what he could do, in my opinion, and that's what he could do. I don't think right now history is treating him well. I think they will treat him better down the road. Justin Trudeau, I mean. As far as Trump, and I think Marcus said something like 1,000 jobs. I mean, I don't know how many I think it's thousands of jobs, even in steel and aluminum. It's hard to deal with, say, steel and aluminum. Say, well, we'll just sell it to Germany and we'll sell it to Sweden and Brazil or wherever we're going to sell it around the world, because that's why we're big trading partners, because we have a land border and trucks go back and forth all the time. Thousands upon thousands daily, goods back and forth. as famously, auto parts cross borders back and forth like 8 times before they're ever inside a car, So there's all of that. It's a little tougher and more expensive to say, well, now we're going to put that on a ship and let it cross the ocean to get to Germany eventually, that's going to be more expensive for everybody. So also, anybody who's got deals, supply deals, has them for, I would think, year or 2 terms, so that we might be able to sign a deal with the EU or specific countries within the EU or the Pacific Rim or wherever else we want to trade, and we probably should. That's one of the things people talk about, right? Is if the USA is our biggest customer, it almost makes it our only customer. We've got to diversify. True, I guess we're trying to do that, but it's just more expensive to get these goods further away from Canada than, say, just over to the United States. And as I said earlier, it doesn't make sense. World trade is how it all works. No country makes everything that their citizens demand. Nor do they want to. Every country in the world doesn't make cell phones. 1 or 2 countries in the world have the top brands of cell phone, and everybody else just imports them. Not everybody. Germany makes cars. As a matter of fact, they talk about manufacturing. America's not a manufacturing country anymore. You know who is? Germany. As a matter of fact, Germany's got the opposite problem. They've got too much invested in manufacturing to the point where they want to get into other areas of GDP. So you can say we'll have other trade customers, but you need them. Germany, that was my point earlier, I guess. Germany makes cars. Not the only ones, again. Japan makes cars. Not everybody makes cars. Some people just buy German, Japanese, and even American cars. So that's world trade, and Trump, for his own self-aggrandizement and this false premise of buy America and make America great again by making it in America again, it's not practical. It's not a practical policy. Do you want to talk about the tariffs, the 51st state, the elections, anything else that's on your mind? It's the 12 o'clock Talkback Hour. You're on 570 News Radio. Larry in for Mike. Back in a moment. Larry Fedoruk in for Mike Farwell today and tomorrow. Mike is traveling with the team. Rangers game tomorrow. All the action, of course, right here on 570 News Radio. Boy, politics sure takes up a lot of space and energy. I get that it's important. I just don't know why it's the most important. I really don't. I mean, other than the philosophical definition of politics being the interaction of people, beyond that, it's really not politics. It's the political systems that we talk about. And there's so much politics, which doesn't really help to unite us, and it doesn't really, and not that we should be completely united. I get differing opinions and this and that. That's kind of what makes democracies turn as well as thoughts. But the politics, the way it's played today on almost every level, is just takes too much energy, too much, it's if we said, everybody said, okay, on our news channel, no politicians, no politics this week. How would we fill the time? We would find stories of people and what they do and report that, wouldn't we? Bob, I got 30 seconds here, and I'm going to guess that you want to be on longer than 30 seconds. So if you just hang on, Bob, I think I made Bob, if it's the same Bob, he called before and I made him hold down that time too. We'll do our quick news update here and then get more of the 12 o'clock Talkback Hour, and we'll get to Bob next at 519-570-2545, 1-800-570-5715, or star 570 on your cell. More of the 12 o'clock Talkback Hour in a moment.
Here's special guest host, Larry Fedoric.
One of my favorite segments of this program when I'm filling in is the 12 o'clock Talkback Hour. It's all up to you. What do you want to talk about? Here's Bob. Bob, go ahead. You're on 570 News Radio.
Hi, Larry. How are you?
I'm good. I'm good. Can you speak up a little bit?
Okay, yeah. Is that better?
Yes, it is. Go ahead.
Okay. I got a kick of the one commercial because Doug Ford is promoting Doug Ford as much as he's promoting Ontario. Because he really isn't that big of a fish. It's a country that's got to go. If he is such a big fish, he wouldn't be go down with all the other premiers. And I wish he'd spend as much time looking after the health care as he is trying to promote himself. And I have a silly little question for you, Larry. You got time?
Yes, sir.
Okay.
Yeah, go ahead.
Do you remember the TV show Family Affair?
Was that the Michael J. Fox one?
No, the one with Uncle Bill and Mr. French.
Oh, way back then. Yes, I do.
Now, if you look at it in sort of a weird way, that show was really way before its time. You had two guys living together, and they adopted a family. And that show could almost come out today.
Yeah, I guess that is true. I guess in some ways, but one was the butler, was it not? French was the butler, wasn't he?
That was the story anyway.
Yeah. Okay. I see.
Have a good day, Larry.
That's a good one. All right. That's going way back on that show. Yeah. If I thought about it long enough, I could come up with the actor who's the lead on that, but I won't. I'll look it up. I'll just look it up later. But yeah, there was also My Two Dads. Remember, but they weren't in relationship. I forget what the reason was why there was two dads. Were they brothers? No, it wasn't. 2.5 Men. They were brothers. What's the other one I'm thinking of? Where there was Full House. Was it Full House? Full House, where there was like 3 dads, but that was a whole other thing. But the Family Affair, that's funny. I think Family Ties, by the way, was Michael J. Fox. That's the show I was thinking of. But Family Affair, yeah. Yeah, here's Paul. Paul, go ahead. You're on the 12 o'clock Talkback Hour.
Hey, a little suggestion for Bob. Write out some notes beforehand so you come out a little bit clearer. But what I want to talk about is what I heard earlier on the show about the rental and the renovictions and whatnot.
Yes, sir.
It was a load of garbage because somebody bought a building, say 30 years ago, and there's tenants in there. Some of these tenants have been in there, 20, 25 years or thereabouts, and they're on the so-called rent control.
Mm-hmm.
Now, somebody bought that as an investment property so many years ago. Over the years, they've had to do repairs on it. And a lot of these buildings, they say there's so many renovictions going on, is because all these buildings are getting old. It's time to renovate them. And, you can do little patch jobs here and there, but eventually it gets down to the point where you need a complete renovation. You get buildings that aren't up to code anymore. The tenant can turn around and say, hey, I'm not going to pay my rent because my taps aren't working right. They've got all these rights. They can demand all these repairs. But the landlord, the owner that invested in that piece of property, he can't put the rent up. Sooner or later, somebody's going to say, oh, this building is unsafe. You have to do all these renovations.
Yeah.
How's a landlord going to do that with the people in there? They're going to say, "Oh, fire escapes have to be updated. All the wiring, all the plumbing has to be updated." And that's not a minor job. That's a major ripping out walls and everything else to get at the plumbing. And these people have been in there for 20, 25 years under rent control.
Mm-hmm.
The landlord can't afford to pay for all these renovations without an increase in rent. So they complain that, under rent control, they're only paying $900 a month, and now it's going to go up to $2,500 a month. Guess what? Maybe over the last 20 years, they should have put a little money aside and made some investments and bought a place instead. It is not somebody who thought ahead. It is not their responsibility for the poor choices that some of these people made earlier in life. I know people aren't going to like that, but under the Landlord Tenant Act, or Residential Tenancy Act, the tenant has more rights than the property owner with no investment whatsoever. Quit your bitching. It's time.
All right. All right,
time.
Paul. Thank you, Paul. Thank you, Paul. I know what you're saying, but I think what we're describing in renovictions, I think what you're describing is not renoviction. I think renovictions exist. I think, in other words, I'm almost saying you're both right. Renovictions exist, and I don't know that it goes from 900 to 2,500. That's like when you have to increase. You can increase rent under rent controls. You just can't increase it by 50, 75, 100%. And you can't. Legitimate renovations. And I agree, the tenants have a lot of rights, but they're long, hard fought for rights. But legitimate renovations need to be done on buildings and on units within a building. And I get that. And rent has to go up year to year. And it does. I don't think that's renovictions. Renovictions are separate. Renovictions are separate. Landlords that are accused of purposely getting a person evicted, pricing them out of an affordable unit based on a renovation that may or may not be needed. That's a renoviction. Well, you're talking about legitimate renovations are not renovictions, okay? Plus, you're right. I don't like the idea that if somebody is not successful, you blame the choices they made. That's not always the way it works. Some people make bad choices and some people could have made smarter choices. So let's punish them for that. Let's punish them for that because they didn't take the right job or go to the right school or go to the right, make a decision based on, it's easy to say, put some dollars aside and, you could have bought a place. Well, no, it's, if it was all up to you, everybody would be a millionaire, More of your calls in a moment. This is the 12 o'clock Talkback Hour on 570 News Radio. Love having you on the show. 12 o'clock Talkback Hour and Larry Fedorikin from Mike Farwell today. Let's get your thoughts on topics you want to talk about. Here's Grant. Grant, go ahead. You're on the 12 o'clock Talkback Hour.
Yeah, I checked out that actor that you were mentioning on Family Affair, Brian Keith.
Brian Keith, thank you. I would have thought of that because he was a pretty good movie leading man as well. Yeah.
And then the girl that played Buffy, she died of an overdose. It's kind of sad.
That's right. She did have kind of a child star sad story. Yeah, I remember that now.
And it kind of makes me think about this blonde girl that was on that 70s show. And again, she overdosed.
She was the older sister, I think. Yeah.
Yeah, so it's kind of sad to hear about these actresses that you think that they're just...
Well, yeah. Thanks, Grant. Yeah, anybody really sad to hear about that kind of stuff. But when they're in the public eye, we tend to look at it a different way as well. Here's Tom. Tom, go ahead. You're on the 12 o'clock Talkback Hour.
How are you doing, Larry?
Good, Tom. How are you?
Good. I guess listening to Paul's comment there about renovations. That's Paul. Has Paul ever lived in an apartment building or a townhouse complex where it was bought by a corporation or a developer who came in and knew and bought the building cheap and knew that there had to be building that had to be upkept and that, but there were tenants in there who were grandfathered in at low rents, that everything was grandfathered in, and did everything possible to get them out. And then suddenly you see those tenants being moved out because the building was in disarray. And then once they moved in, they did a quick paint job, threw some cheap laminate down there, put some new appliances, and the rent went from $700 to $2,000. In some cases, $1,500. Yeah. And every time somebody moved out, the rent went up again. That's a renoviction.
That is a renoviction.
That is, you're moving people out for a profit. And there was 2 or 3 buildings in Hamilton where I lived at the time, was owned by a corporation that the tenants went on a rent strike because the building wasn't being kept and up to standards. And there was windows broken. There was just the basic repairs of the building weren't being maintained. So that's renoviction. That is basically deliberate to get people out to make profit off of others.
And unreasonable. Thanks for the call, Tom. Unreasonable profit. And I think when Paul called, I was trying to make that distinction between renovictions and legitimate renovations. And I get it. There's bad landlords and there's bad tenants. And I don't think we just have to sort of say, well, that's the story. That renovictions are actually renovations. No, there's 2 different things. Here's Terry. Terry, go ahead. You're on 570 News Radio.
Hey, hi, Larry. How are you?
I'm good. How are you?
Oh, not so bad. A nice snowy day. Can't complain.
Yeah, there we go.
Did you work at CFTR at one time?
Oh, yeah.
So Coop and Tom Rivers and those guys?
I worked with Tom Rivers, and I did a morning show together for a year and a half.
So
and I worked with Tom before that, and Mike and all those guys. Yeah.
Yeah, so
great times.
What became of those guys? Because I know radio has changed over the years. I mean, 680 now is a news station, and even 1050 Chum at that time. Those were the 2 biggies in the big city, and now one is a sports station, and the other one does news all day. So, what has become of those 2 guys? Do you know? I haven't heard from them. I know that Mike Cooper was kicking around FM radio for a while, but I haven't heard from him.
Long time, and he did very successful at another Rogers station, CHFI, for years.
Yes, that's correct.
Retired only, I want to say, a couple of years ago. Tom Rivers, sadly, no longer with us, and that's been some time now. I don't know how long, but it's been a good, I'm saying, almost 20 years since we lost Tom.
Wow, yeah, because I haven't heard from him. Like Mike Cooper, I heard of. Like you said, he was on CHFI for a while, but even that, unless you're a dedicated listener to that station, you wouldn't know of it. But yeah, it's interesting, Annie. So you've come a long way, eh?
Yeah, I mean, I've been in talk radio for, I guess, 20, 25 years now. And as much as I loved CFTR, I went on to FM and then went on to talk radio. And I kind of wish I would have been doing talk radio my entire career because it was my favorite part of it all.
Yeah, that seems to be the format nowadays on radio. It's more talk than anything. I think music has kind of died off. I mean, I don't know the younger generations like the stations on FM now, but yeah, you're right. Like top 40 has definitely gone out the window, and it's talk. Well, there's
so many more places for them to get music now.
That's true. Yeah, now you got the
radio's no longer the gatekeeper of anything really. But
no, it isn't. No, it isn't. It's changed. But anyway, yeah, it was interesting because I remember vaguely. I remember your name, but I couldn't put my finger on it where I've heard your name before, but now that I remember CFTR vague. But you would have been there back in the 80s, wouldn't you? 70s, 80s?
It was the 80s, and then I was on 99.9 in Toronto in the 90s, and then on KISS FM in the 90s as well, before I went to talk radio in the 2000s. So,
okay, yeah.
There you go.
Yeah, you're a staple. Anyway, have a good one, Larry.
There's my CV. Right.
Yes, staple. Okay, bye-bye.
Thank you, Terry. Thanks for the call. Thank you for letting me reminisce too about staying. Somebody last week when I was on, or a couple of weeks ago, mentioned Larry Silver, who was one of the great news guys at CFTR and still involved in the business for many years since. I saw him about a year ago. We had a little mini reunion of a few people, and Yeah, it was great times, great people, great memories. But today, it's 570 News Radio, the 12 o'clock Talkback Hour. We'll try and squeeze in a few more of your calls after a short break. Be right back. I'm Larry Fedoruk in for Mike Farwell. We're into like the waning moments of the show, so prisoner of the clock here. So if I have to cut you off, I apologize, but I do want to get you on. Here's Tom. Tom, go ahead. You're on the 12 o'clock Talkback Hour.
How are you?
I'm good, Tom. How are you?
Everybody blames Trump and everything, but we should blame our federal government and the stupid ministers, premiers. Their fault. Because Trump, all he wants is to take Canada down. It doesn't matter about tariffs or anything. That's all he does. And he puts Canada to spend more money on the military and border, and we don't have the money. So they should look at finding other markets. Now, the stupidest people is that CEO from the aluminum. She says 90% of the steel goes to the States. Why didn't you find any more other? But, she's so stupid. They didn't go for other markets. So now we have bad relations with China, India, Russia. Who else are we going to deal? Europe doesn't want any of our stuff. Don't blame them. It's just the stupid federal government, all three of them. And the worst guy is the NDP. Singh. Crazy. Should never have.
Don't like him.
Okay.
Tom, I think, Tom, I'm going to move to Lorraine here only for time. But Tom, I think a lot of us are finding out that, this all our eggs in one basket idea probably is not a good idea. Lorraine, go ahead.
Oh, hi. I'm not a raving Canadian nationalism, but this trumpet blatting has got to me. I think tomorrow, the next day, is a 25-year anniversary of our flag. We should get out there and wave our flag. We'll put them up. Right after Christmas, I took down my decorations and I put 4 little tiny flags in my window box for plants. Had to remove the nuts from the squirrels. But anyway, couldn't do anything big because of the frozen ground. But I think we should turn our country red and white.
Lorraine, thank you for the call. I'm going to end on that call because it's a great call. And I just did a podcast called Beware of Patriotism. We are not a flag-waving nation. We could be a little more. You know what? The way patriotism, the definition of it, I agree with. What the U.S. has turned patriotism into is something I don't think that's very Canadian. We're proud Canadians and we love our country in a different way than just the flag waving. But a little flag waving and putting some flags out there, not a bad idea. It doesn't have to be July 1st for us to wave the flag a little bit. Let's do that. Back from Mike Farwell tomorrow, 570 News Radio.